I mean, we knew that Donald Trump had engaged in a pressure campaign on Mike Pence, both publicly and privately, in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th. His goal was to get Mike Pence to overturn the electoral college results that showed Joe Biden winning 306 electoral votes and Donald Trump winning 232 electoral votes. I think what we got Thursday, Jen, was more meat on that bone. We heard captivity, but their families do believe they've been captured. And then there's a third veteran.
This is Fresh Air. Two well-received movies from this year's virtual Sundance Film Festival began.
And that's part of our problem. The reality is that that's heresy. Anytime you use religion to justify violence against gay people, against women, against the poor, against any segment of the community, when you use it to suppress the vote, when you use religion to try to block living wages and health care, it is exactly wrong. One of the reasons it's wrong from a moral and a religious standpoint is because those become the policies of death. You know, every piece of progressive policy costs lives. When you deny health care, it costs lives. When you attack LGBT communities, you cost lives. When you allow guns to flourish in the society, people to walk around with AK-47s, you cost lives. When you block living wages and people moving up out of poverty, we knew that even before COVID hit, poor people were dying at a rate of 700 people a day, nearly 30 people an hour per day, 250,000 a year from the effects of poverty. That is contrary to the biblical call to life. It is contrary to the call of the ancient prophets that says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children their prey, P-R-E-Y. It's contrary to the call of Jesus that we're supposed to be about life and good news to the poor. And it's contrary to the Declaration of Independence that we're supposed to be about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and contrary to the Constitution, promised to establish justice and equal protection under the law. We are a movement of life. What we're saying is, and on Saturday, we're having Black people, white people, brown people, Asian people, Native people, gay people, straight people, Republicans, Democrats.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Dreamy Dreamland. I'm sitting on my neighbor's deck. Thunderstorm is just starting to roll in. Weather here is, I'm up in the mountains, and I'm right at this place where the weather comes from the west, and it's kind of a rainforest. But in the last 8 years, it's gotten drier and drier. But this spring, and we're late spring, early summer, however you want to look at it. Juneteenth. You know what Juneteenth is? Monday is that holiday, June 19th. Juneteenth. 2 years after Lincoln gave the address freeing the slaves, Texas decided to do it. They wanted to keep those slaves for 2 more harvests of cotton. Slaves. They only changed it because the Northern Army came in with 100,000 black Union soldiers and went around and freed the slaves. And then tried to pursue what was considered, restoration, rehabilitation of the United States, and we still haven't gone through it. And 1/6 is, you hear them go on and on, congressional hearings. You have to realize that there is no difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden said, he's going to do all this environmental stuff. The the Saudis or we're going to make sure that they take care of human rights, and he's going to beg with his hat in his hand. And really, there's not much the Saudis can do. They have upped their production. And the United States is, energy free, but we have had, as they call it, the supply train. A number of refineries have gone offline. A number of pipelines have gone offline. Not that there isn't any oil, or the oil is too expensive. Oil right now is about 118 a barrel. I remember when oil was $136 a barrel, and at the pump, it was $2.10. So you have to realize that nothing is as it seems to be. Right? And really, nobody wants to hear this. I've been talking about the big splat for the last 2.5 years. And I started doing Dreamy Dreamland, May 18th, 2016, I think, or 17th, might be in the 17th. Anyway, somewhere around there. It's been about 4 years, give or take. Right? And I've told stories. Oh, you love to hear my stories. I came on to, I burst on to YouTube through John Birmingham's channel. And, John, what can I say about John, except he's the poster boy for white male. What does he say he has? He gives himself a good, body dysmorphia, I think. Is what he says he has. I'm not quite sure. But Dreamy Dreamland, where did that come from? Back in 1977, I don't know if John was even born, but 1977, I was in Australia with my sweetie and my first, registered wife, Donna Ann. And we were visiting my good friend, Neil Curtis, who Neil is the Gary Trudeau of Australia. He's their #1 political cartoonist. And I met him in New York when I was working on Xenons, the disco. And, Tony Two Toes and Bobby Bentnose, the job had been, the building was done. Everything was pretty much done. The service was in. Everything was wired, but nothing worked. Right? And if the disco lights don't flash, you don't have a disco. And they had some serious, what would you call them, effects, right? It was right around when Spielberg had Close Encounters, and they had built their own flying saucer. Right? I built a paper mache fiberglass model, which they then took over to George and George, who built that. And that's where they got my name, from George and George, because I was their electrician. George and George is the premier theater builder, right? And so, like, a good example of their work is, Cirque du Soleil, right? When they built their facility in Las Vegas, and it had all kinds of hydraulic lifts and platforms and movie things, right? And lighting and effects and lasers. That was George and George. Lincoln Center, the opera. The sucker is as big as 2 football fields, the stage, because they have full, scenery, right, on these stages that just, the lights dim down, and then a whole new amazing, scenery that fills the whole proscenium up is there, and they do it like in 20 seconds instead of little guys in black suits running around trying to put furniture here. And I mean, the whole thing, right? With the actors already set in place, bang, lights go up and they, bah, bah, right? So I used to work for them doing stuff like that. And that's how Tony Two Toes and Bobby Bentnos. First, my godfather, Mike Finelli, look up Finelli Bar. And that guy, mobsters do, drugs and prostitution and protection and gambling. No, Mike was his thing was tablecloths, these amazing little rolls that you get in New York that are like French baskets but little rolls, and hotel bar and butter. Those little pads. Those are designed. You get the amazing bread and you crack it, and you take that, you know, butter and you put it in there, and then you just take the little gold wrapper out and you eat that, and it's like crunchy on the outside, gooey on the inside. Just the most amazing bread roll. So tablecloths, napkins, bread rolls, and the beer, um, tap. Not the beer itself. Nothing other than the thing that makes the beer come into your glass. He controlled all of those, right? And that was what his. And he had a number of restaurants and nightclubs and things like that. And my mentor, Grandpa Stoll, was a good friend of his. They're about the same age. Grandpa Stoll probably a little older. And Mike loved me like a grandson, right? Just like Mike loved me like a son. And when you have people like that, of power, prestige, gravitas, and they love you, not because I have to, like my parents, you know, I came out of my mom's, potato hole, and as I get older, I see how much I am like my parents. Not so much in consciousness, but even in consciousness, my parents were not the average bears. I mean, they were, you know, what's the right word? Oh, controlled, maybe. Manipulated by their neuroses and their environment. Because my environment was so interestingly constantly changing. Constantly, I went from one unconditional loving mentor to the next, right? And they were all different, right? And so I'm a good example of nature and nurture, right? So I am, let's see. Ooh, I can navigate almost anything, In first grade, I got murdered, crushed esophagus, broken left orbit, and blind in one eye, and deaf in one ear, and I came out okay. You know, I may slur my words a little bit, and I never even go oh, like John goes on about how his gym teacher made fun of him, right? It's like how much I get murdered, right? And then when you wake up in a Catholic hospital, it was like a scene straight out of a Lucky Man. I had my head was all wrapped. I was all wrapped up, and I just kind of came conscious because when that nun hit me the first time, she grabbed me by the neck and put me against the wall and went bam. I was out, so I didn't feel anything. Right? Didn't cry, didn't whimper, didn't. I was out, and I wake up till 5 days later when my head was all wrapped up and I was in this hospital, and these two nuns were talking about when I was going to get my lobotomy. Right? Oh, his head. They say that his brain has to stop swelling, and after that, we're going to give him a lobotomy. Right. I mean, that's what is a cap. So this eye can see things that other people can't. This ear is like radar. Right. I have a Doppler thing going on with it, and And because that happened to me for 2 years, you know, one year I went back to Mrs. Gerling, who was the sweetest. She was my kindergarten teacher, and she was great. And then my godfather, Cardinal Cushing, got me into this place called in Garden City, Long Island. It was the Maryknoll Sanctuary, right? And it was, their version of a think tank. They had about 20 something priests and about 30 something nuns, and they were all in street clothes. They weren't, girls weren't wearing the penguin suits and the guys weren't wearing the collar, and they were all brilliant. That's where I learned how to Greek, Hebrew, and because I couldn't speak, all I could do was hear with this ear. This is like my brain ear. So, and every one of those scholars, male and female, were world famous in their discipline: physics, math, history, literature, language, you name it. And we just lived in community, and I just hung out with them. And I didn't like go to class. I just, we'd have breakfast. We had little chores, and I would go. You know, someone would say, "Oh, Al, come with me," and I would help them. And as I was helping them, they would give me a lesson. Right? And I did that for almost 2.5 years. And then when I hit about 10, my parents moved out into Nassau, Suffolk County, out deeper. And out there was right where the old wealth, they weren't in the Hamptons, they were a little closer, but it was where the Miracle Mile was. It was like where Billy Joel grew up, in a town called Oyster Bay, Long Island. I live right next to it. Right? I live in a place called Oldfield, right? And Mr. Young's farms were over there, and Mr. Anderson's estate was over here. Mr. Anderson had 300-acre, amazing house, and he had his own farm, his own horses, his own dogs, his own, you name it, he had it. And he outlived everybody in his family. And so the people who were there were his servants, were his family. He had a housekeeper and a couple maids and a butler or two, and a librarian and a secretary, and the guy who took care of the horses. And M was his daughter, and the guy who took care of the dogs, he had whippets, and Desmond was the son. And Desmond was a tad autistic, really smart, right? And he could communicate. He wasn't like, Asperger's or anything, but he walked around on the tips of his toes. And he was always very polite and kind of talked this way. He was very conscious of every word and I was taught how, because of my esophagus, my things sound a little strange out of my mouth. It's A, I have no teeth, but B, my esophagus doesn't work like most. And so as it brings air across, the vocal cords, it does it in a different way. So I have to be very disciplined and distinct about everything I say. I say everything very specific. Spirit world, yep, protected you, yep, pretty much. And lobotomy, yep. And I realized that it was more fun working with people, being part of something that was greater than myself, that brought love's co-creation. And the Maryknolls, that's all they were about, love's co-creation. Everything they were talking about that all the time. And the teachings of Jesus, the Old Testament and New Testament, right? And so I read the Old Testament in Greek, um, and it was a version of the Greek Orthodox, um, you know, um, oh, what was that called? Merovingian, right? And so it was what Merovingian is the family line of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and his followers, and Nazarenes, and there were other before Jesus, who was Jesus. And there were ones who came after, like Saint Germain is a good example. And they were basically lucky bastards, right? And they were Nazarenes, you know. And so when they constantly talk about Jesus being a Nazarene, they weren't like talking about his neighborhood, what cul-de-sac he came from. They were talking about the spirit person he was, right? And so I was brought up and nurtured and protected by the Nazarenes, right? And the one thing, and as I was being handed over, and it was very interesting because none of those folks, they weren't all priests. My mentor, Billy Kluber, got a Nobel Prize for just being one of the guys who discovered background radiation. He was a radar guy, so he was all about microwave, and he worked at the Rad Lab during World War II. And more exotic technology was developed at the Rad Lab than at Los Alamos. Basically, atomic bomb was just a big firecracker, right? It was, Nikola Tesla made a device the size of a pack of cigarettes in about 1880 something. And his lab that I used to live in, Mike Stahl Sr. owned the building because Mike Stahl Sr. was Nikola Tesla's bench electrician, meaning Tesla would visualize something, make a working drawing, and give it to Mike and say, "Here, build this." And Mike had to figure out, the physics was there, the math was there, a design of what it should kind of be like, but he had to do it. And so there was a building called Mohawk Electric on the corner of, it was either Reed or Duane. I think it was Reed and Hudson. Right? And that's right where, I guess it's Duane because Duane Park is right there. And Hotel Bar butted there. That whole park used to be, that whole neck of the woods over there used to be the cheese and butter district. And the last to go was Hotel Bar. Owned by Grandpa, Hotel Bar, and Mike Stahl, not Mike Stahl, Mike Finelli. And so I kept being handed off, and I constantly was handed off until, when was the last real mentor I had? Oh, 92 or 3, somewhere around there, when I was at UNC, right? I was at UNC at Asheville, I was at UNC at Chapel Hill. I was UNC at G, right? And so it's interesting about Asheville. They had one serious representation of DARPA there. Because school was kind of it was in its, before it was a state college. This guy who was he was the most amazing guy. He was an herbalist, right? And went up to the mountains of North Carolina, and Asheville and Waynesville and Hickory and everything along that ridge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And on the other side of Mount Mitchell was Tennessee, where you had places like Micaville and Boone. And so he had a college of herbology. And he knew Post and Kellogg's and Rudolf Steiner and Wilhelm Reich, and all of those, 1890s to 1940s. Amazing. That was a period of time where we could have amazingly changed the world, but we didn't, because we let the military-industrial complex buy everybody off, and we let, end of World War II, Germany, the real estate bombed into the Stone Age, but the Nazis escaped. About 1 million Nazis escaped to Antarctica, the moon, Argentina, South America, Central America, and all of that we're experiencing from El Salvador, Nicaragua, all of that is from the Nazis. And when Russia is talking about the Nazis in the Ukraine, we can just think of, we think of Adolf Hitler. We don't really have a good grasp of what the Nazis are, Nationalist Socialists, right? So here comes somebody down the dirt road. Coming up to my neighbor's house where I have to leave. No, it's the Floridians. And he's going down that road probably at 40 miles an hour. Where that dirt road is kind of, I go up and down it at 5 miles an hour. It's not bumpy. Now, I worked on it for the last, since he moved here and destroyed it. And pretty much, I got it perfect. So I pretty much got it to a place where I don't really have to fool with it, right? And the road is safe. The water is draining, so it doesn't bother me. I go up and down the road at 5 miles an hour, so it's not a problem. He goes zinging up and down it and his kids, do their motorcycle thing all the time. Not all the time, and that's what's great. Last 2 months I haven't really seen them. They haven't. I mean, once in a while, but it's a half hour of that. It's not a big deal. They did it all day long, different thing. But again, that guy is just like John Birmingham. He is a poster boy of dysfunction, right? And his family, I have no idea about, he doesn't work, but he has lots of money. I wonder what that means. He's come from Florida, and his path with his wife and kids have been all over the place, like they were running from something, right? So they bought this place real cheap, and now all the properties, he bought it 100 grand, and he's trying to sell it for 400 grand. He bought some stuff on the other side of the mountain range in the meth village, and so it's just I just look around and I just watch. It's all right in front of us, right? So I've been prepped for this, and as I grew, all of my mentors kind of had I don't even know what you call it, but a dream that they were trying to sculpt me into something. My cardinal godfather wanted me to be, a rocket scientist for the Pope, because the Catholic Church owns science. All like, who do you think's giving the money for CERN? NASA. You name it. Here comes the rain. So, let's see what did we say here. Field. So yeah, the old field. Mistake. I feel a circle everywhere. Yep. Old field, Long Island, right? And so this guy bought a strip of farmland from Farmer Young, and because he had 3 big, gigantic 100-acre things where he just grew corn, because he had animals, and he made sweet corn for the supermarkets, right? Really great sweet corn. And then he had these other fields where he had other things growing, vegetables, stuff like that. And he bought this guy bought this one, maybe 100 acres. And he put a road up right away, and he had 6 lots. And he built himself a house, and he built another house. It's like a model, like this is what you could do. And then people from New York, because it was right on the line of Nassau, Suffolk County, right? So you could take the train in, right? The train was right there, and that would probably take you 40 minutes. Or you could drive on Long Island Expressway if you wanted to have your own car and didn't want to be on a train. That's my dad. He got himself a nice Oldsmobile. He would leave early and get to his factory office in Long Island City, right near Eagle Electric. So every time I would go with him, I would walk across the street and go into Eagle Electric. I mean, this gigantic factory They were the first guys to make dimmers. The first slide dimmers, Eagle Electric, right? New Tone was also part of Eagle Electric. They manufactured, in the 50s and 60s, more than half of the switches and outlets and light fixtures and big electric service stuff. So I would go in there and just walk around. And people, this is a factory, big factory. And I just walk around and look at stuff and and it's like because this is when I was still pretty short. And they would look at me like, they didn't even see me. And then one day, this one guy said, wait, kid, are you a kid? What are you? What? And I said, well, I'm an electrician. And it's like I'm 6 or 7. Well, so I didn't say that. I said, I'm an electrician. He said, what'd you say? I'm an electrician. Well, follow me. And he says, here's my clipboard. So I carried the guy's clipboard and, I couldn't see because his eye couldn't see. And so he basically would say, write this down. And then I'd make a picture or an equation or something of that nature. And then he'd look at it and he'd like, right. And then he said, pull this paper up. He goes, okay, there's 5 boxes here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just tell you, when we stop at something, you just click what box I tell you to click. Okay. So that was Dennis Young. And he was like heir to the Eagle Electric fortune. And he was quite an interesting guy. And Dennis Young knew Grandpa, years later, like 4 years later, I would stumble into Grandpa Stahl's shop and be his apprentice. And then a year or so, I met Dennis again. Right. But before that, when I was living out in Glen Head was our North Shore School District, right between whatever that city there, what's it called? Freeport and the other place on the North Shore were the was the 2 cities. Freeport was one city, and that's where all the movie stores were, and the other one is where all the yachts were made. What was it called? Port Jefferson? No, but Port Jefferson was near it. Anyway, North Shore School System, right? And they were just, while we moved there, they were just retooling it up, meaning making it something that no one, because it was like a very rural school system. And they, all these people were, it's pretty obvious that there were going to be people a lot moving in, not rich like Mr. Anderson, but, upper mobile like my parents, right? And so they built a really amazing school system. And it wasn't like anything, just turning out proles. It really had music, had art, had literature. We had music, art, and literature appreciation in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And in 6th, 7th, and 8th, we had to do it. In 4th grade, we in music appreciation, we got to pick an instrument like that. We got lessons at. We weren't in a band or anything, but by 6th grade, 6, 7, and 8, we were in bands, right? The orchestra, the marching band. They were like tooling us up for the high school, and I played saxophone, and they actually had a jazz band and a experimental music. This is like early mid 60s, right? And all those teachers were great. And Mr. Morales was my math teacher, and I had him as my math. He's going to be my student, right? And so from 3rd to 7th grade, Mr. Morales was. So he taught me, and he loved geometry. I loved geometry. He taught me algebra, like when I was in 4th grade. And he said, you have to realize algebra is the working man's advanced math. It's like for architecture. It's like for engineering. It's like for those kind of right there, right in front of you kind of things that you need to know math about, And he gave me the whole story how the Catholic Church stepped on people's consciousness, and so no one knew how to read or write or do math for about 900 years. It was called the Dark Ages. But when they wanted to build those big cathedrals, they needed folk who could read a blueprint, who could understand the math so the building wouldn't fall down. And so that was algebra. And the Greeks had algebra, and the Egyptians had algebra, and the Sumerians also, but Sumerians had trigonometry. They didn't call it that, and it was way more interesting than the frigging trigonometry we have. And trigonometry is for that. So algebra is for the macro world, the big world, and trigonometry is for the micro world. And it's both those maths don't really describe. It's working. It now allows you to work on something, but it's not real. It's not what it is. And Mr. Morales basically taught me that from third grade on. So the only real math there is geometry, and I love geometry. And he loved the way I did proofs. I mean, he said, "It's like you're like a razor blade. It's like it's not sloppy. It's beautiful. But he taught me all this other stuff too. So by the time I got to hang with Mike and all those guys, I was ready to rock and roll, right? And then when I hung out with Billy Kluver, who discovered background radiation and brought modern art to America. He's the guy who curated the Armory show in the 1920s, because he went off and studied at Oxford and in Paris and other places. And he was young, and he was more enamored with the pretty girls in art world. So he was that. So that's kind of how I got into that. And I met Billy Kluver because my parents lived in a place in New York City called the Imperial House, right? I mean, it surely was. And I mean, it was like a really nice, apartment building, but the lobby was like a hotel, had a restaurant in it, and it had a lobby, concierge, they took, they had your mail ready for you. They took the packages up to you. There was, the elevators, they had 2 elevators going up and down for the people who lived in the apartments, and they had service elevators to bring up service stuff. So whatever packages, anybody came to deliver, it went to that desk. They brought it up, and in the back, up the service elevator, there's a service hall to the apartments, and all those apartments had a little like closety apartment between that closet and the kitchen, right? And that's where your maid or butler or servant, and in my parents' case, my grandma, the gods are joining the conversation here. So that place was between Lexington and Park, and right across the street was what was the name of that girls' school? It'll pop into my mind. It's a college. It was a college then, but it had a high school too. And my parents lived on 21st floor, and I could look from our little balcony down into where the girls' locker room was, right? And the girls could see, I mean, I'm just across the street, Now I'd be like hanging off the edge, and they'd be looking. So they'd put on a show. What was it called? Anyway, the next, so that college was on 69th, 68th Street, and the Imperial House was right on, Lexington and Park, Lexington and 3rd, and Madison and Lexington, then Park, right? So, what's the name of that college? It'll pop into my head. And those girls would, put on a show, a hoochie coochie show for me, and I was like, we moved to that place, and I was a freshman in high school till, I went off to college. Those 4 years that I was at those prep schools, right? So I was never at that apartment that much. So I didn't get a room. I got, slept on this couch that had a bar in the middle. Like there was no way you could get comfortable. It's like one of these a fold out bed from the couch. And I always had to sleep on that. And when my grandma slept, the bed was so small I couldn't sleep on it. And my sister, she got to sleep in a closet. Anyway, I did not spend that much time there because, when I was 9, when my parents first they didn't live in the Imperial House. They lived in Manhattan House, which is another very, very nice, right in the same neighborhood, And I basically, that's when I kept blowing things up in my parents' apartment. And my mom walked me down 3rd Avenue and stopped in this electric shop. And Mike Stahl, not Grandpa Stahl, but Mike Stahl, had his office there because he was building office buildings, an apartment building. He was the local 3 electrician of the Stahl empire. And Grandpa, because New York City was still a manufacturing town, he built most of the machines and most of those factories and most of all of that, from the 1890s to the 1940s. Those entities were still there, so he would, his business was fixing that stuff. And so my mom walked me into Mike's shop and said, "Do something, boy, kid." And Mike had 5 daughters, and he so wanted a son. And bingo, I was his. So Mike Stahl treated me more like a son than my father ever did. My father was, "Who are you? You don't belong here." And that was my dad's attitude. I mean, once in a while, we had a good time. The Marinols, yep. They're in Ireland, yep. The Marinols are the biggest, the baddest, most kick-ass, loving crew I've ever saw. I had this really great, Mary Jo Halpern was a nun, Marinol, right? And I don't know if you remember this, but during the Jimmy Carter years, all of the Nazi crazy shit that was going on through Operation Paperclip and, Colonel Ollie North and all of those guys of COG, continuation of government, and that's how we got FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Act, right? And so I don't know if you remember this, but a crew of nuns in El Salvador, when they're having their civil war, were trying to get, because everybody was Catholic, so they would put on the penguin suit and go walk right in the middle of a firefight and start praying, right? And it usually stopped the Nazis and the death camp guys from killing the innocents, and then the nuns would get out. So Mary Jo taught me the 3 rules, doctor, because she was an MD, a doctor. Doctor, do no harm. Do not get involved unless you have a workable exit strategy for getting the innocents out of harm's way. And the 3rd was, do not get involved unless you can learn something that will help you do your best. Right? So I got that from Mary Jo Halpern, sister. And so we did all kinds of, she and I were tight, we were art party ringleaders, cultural provocateurs, right? She was another person who got me into the avant-garde, but also she introduced me to Bishop Kaufman up there uptown at the Protestant big monastery, which is the biggest anti-war place in the United States. I mean, if you have anything to do for social consciousness, for social welfare, he'll give you a little room in the basement to run your organization, and he'll let you use his 501c3 to raise money. I mean, he was really a great guy. So she and him were tight buddies. So she knew everybody like that. She knew Martin Luther King. You name it, she knew them, right? And so she was in El Salvador doing that, but she was a doctor, so she was off at someone that's having a baby. So she and her assistant were there, and a few other of the El Salvadorian nuns were with her. And so they did not, because the deaf guys didn't shoot them in the middle of a shootout with the liberation guys. They went to their sanctuary and raped them and beheaded them and left them in a pile of bloody mess on the altar of the church there. And basically, it was done in a very satanic kind of way. And there were certain elements that pointed to the Operation Paperclip characters. And, when that happened, when the National Security Act of 1947 was put forth, that's when the United States became a fascist state, period, single, right? And we're seeing it right now, right? When, the budget, the defense, and that's when they went from the War Department to the Defense Department, that switched the words around, like 1984, Newspeak, just like No Child Left Behind, guaranteed every child was going to be left behind. So all this stuff that I was like, bred to try to, not try, but to influence to the better. Meaning I'm not fighting anything. I am there to influence to the better, to serve love's co-creation, to in every day and every way take the peace of the earth and make it stronger. Period. That's it. That's what I'm here for, right? Not to be because I've always been an A-lister, I don't have to try, As my master said, don't try, do. Meaning, the image of Yoda was George Lucas saw my master, and basically, but my master was 6'2", not 3 foot, not 2'6", so that was a constant reformation. My master would say, do not do not try, right? Do your best. Do conscious intent. I am conscious intent. I am conscious intent. I am. Om. Right? And I have the other thing I was taught by all these folks. There is no finish line. So I have no I have to do this, right? I mean, wake up in the morning. I have to pinch a loaf, water the leaves, and then turn on the sprinklers. That's my first thing. Walk up the hill, walk across the football field, walk over to the main valve of my spring, and turn the sprinklers on my garden. Because I have my garden all set up, big fence around it. Don't have to do anything. It's all coming up nice. I just turn the water on, from about 7 or 8 in the morning till about noon, and I turn it off. And boy, it loves it. Everything is happy. The beans are going like all get out. The spinach, the broccoli, the cabbage. Everybody's doing good. That's what my garden has mostly. And I don't spray anything on it. I don't do anything on it. I just have earthworms, right? And so when we moved to Brookville, Mr. Anderson had the big estate. So there's this road, and there's like 5 or 6 houses, the Guafmis, the Sarahs, who else? A couple others. And my dad, he got this nice chunk. It was the guy who built the house. It was a Sears house. He was an executive of Sears. And Sears used to have these kit houses. And this guy they had a big kit, right? So, he had a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom, gigantic, main room or whatever they call them, the room. Then a living room, a library, a TV room, a dining room, a kitchen. It had a basement too. Here comes the rain. It's good. It's cooling down. It was like 90 something when I started this. Probably in the 70s. It's getting cool. That's nice. So, anyway, so I got there, and I was still a sick kind of kid, but doing better. And they shipped me off to this guy, allergist, and who, stuck me up like a voodoo doll with pins. He said, "Man, you're electric to everything." So what we're going to do is, instead of you sending, because he was between our Old Brookville and Montauk, way further out, almost near the Hamptons. And he was this doctor, like Dr. Moriarty, and his wife was a breeder of horses and and dogs, Labradors, yellow Labradors. And so, he said, "You know what? Instead of you sleeping in our little, guest room, we're going to have you sleep in the barn with the horses and the dogs, because there's a bitch about to have puppies, and this is the first time out, and she seems to like you. So what you're going to spend? You're going to be here 2 weeks. You're going to spend 2 weeks with her." Which I did, and it was interesting. And so I mucked out the horses, and the dogs, and I'm really running on empty here, and that my phones kind of don't work because I don't have the money to re-up them, and that's okay. I'll go a month without a phone. If I go any longer, then they get rid of the phone number. So it's getting dark, right? It's getting even darker. If I stay on this edge of the storm, it'll be fine. The back edge of the storm pushes because I can see the front edge over there, and that's good. And so because rain's like this, the thunder stays over there. There won't be any hail, and there won't be any real big time breezes. Yeah, really love it. Yeah, really smart. They're all about service, service to the people, service to the poor, service to the community, not service to the state, not service to the dollar, not service to power. But all those are illusions. Illusions. Anyway, so I went out and spent 2 weeks. When I came back, the woman gave me the run to the litter, Dandy. Here's Dandy. He had all the papers. And it was interesting because the doctor, I was his lab rat. I mean, that was the real reason that he had a number of concoctions that I fit the bill, right? And so he wanted to experiment on me out of sight of my parents. And I sent for him. So if I died, it'd be okay. But he was a great guy, and the wife was a great woman, and I just loved the horses and the dogs, right? And so I had lived in that house before I went off to the that exposure that summer. That was we had gotten to Oldfield right when the first school year started. Right, we got there 2 weeks before bingo. School starts. I was there. Bingo, the third grade. Met my friends, or met a friend, then another friend, and another friend. Yep, it's raining. The rain is coming straight down, and that's good. So when I came back, so I had some friends, but I went away for 2 weeks and wasn't thinking about them, and they were doing shit. They had already grown. They had already. Everyone who were my friends had lived in Glen Cove or Glen Head or Oldfield all their lives, right? I was the newest thing in their life, and we were tight, but we weren't like our lives revolved around each other. So what happens to make that really happen is I met Desmond, who had the dogs, and I met Em, whose dad ran the horses, and Mr. Green Jeans, right? And what was Scotty's name? Arthur? Could have been Arthur. He's a Scottish guy, and he was part of the OS, the English secret, the assassins of England. Like, what Double 007. He was like a 007. And he told me all he knew the guy who wrote the 007 books. They had been in World War II together, Ian Fleming. And he said, everything that Fleming writes is true. And he explained to me the whole dynamic of, the bilateral agreements between different countries, but they were just elements of the same poly or omni power structure. Even the United States and Russia were part of that because they were all reading a script. He said the only element that was kind of outside of that script was the the storm is definitely coming in here. I should have brought a umbrella or a raincoat, but I'm underneath there. Temperature's definitely fallen at least 30 degrees. Went from 90 to probably 60. Anyway, and it's really dark. It's dark. You could see me before. You can't see me now. But can you hear me? I don't have my hand over the microphone or anything, do I? So anyway, I'll give you a picture of this. So I walked here, and hopefully the thing stops. Doesn't do this all night. I'll have to sleep on the couch out here. Anyway, so that's I got Danny. He's a little puppy, and man, when he was born as the runt, the mom wouldn't feed him. I kept saying no, feed the puppy, and the mommy was like, I did my thing. I cleaned them off. You take care of them, and I put him in my pocket, right, and he was. He loved the way I smelled. He loved my warmth. And so until he got too big for my pocket, that's where he always was. So he was my bud, my bro. And then when we got back, and within a week, he wasn't the run anymore. And he was, my grandma was feeding him. My mom, who was a real dog girl, she was feeding him. I was feeding him. And I would take him everywhere. And he'd stay right at my side. He wouldn't run in front. He wouldn't run back. He wouldn't try and bite my foot. He was, we were like attached, right? And not like the Floridian guy. He's like doing the holler thing. He's got like 8 dogs up there. He got 1 dog, and then he got a female dog and got his other dog to knock that dog up. He had 4 or 5 puppies, and then he had them all screw each other, and now he's got like 10, 12 puppies, and they're all kind of blue tick and what are those big blockhead dogs that everyone thinks are scary that fight each other, and those dogs are the nicest, sweetest dogs. So all the puppies, because of the other generation, are beating them up. About 6 of them come down and stay with me. And they're a little obnoxious, especially the girl. She loves to bite my. So I had to start wearing boots, and I have these like snake boots, and she tried to bite my leg, and she got her teeth caught on the bottom plate of my snake boots, and then I walked on her head a few times, and then she stopped trying to bite my leg. And I mean, they're a little obnoxious that way, but they're getting better. They stop when I say stop. When I put my finger up, they sit. I put my hand out flat, they lie down, and then they go to sleep. And the other dogs don't do that. They're too, they've got too many bad habits. But this generation, and so the Florida guy came down and said, "So how come those dogs obey you, and they go upstairs and shit in my bed?" I just looked at him. Like he thought that I was training them to shit in his bed. It's like, really? Okay. They're only, like 4 or 5 months old. I don't think so. All I got them is to stop, sit, lie down. Right? Yeah, it's raining, but that's fine. Rain is good, and that is cooling off is good. Right? The thing I don't want is hail and 60-mile-an-hour straight winds, because I am a little exposed out here. Like, here I am underneath this. I'm indoors or in the basement, or I'm protected by other things, like love. Right? Still one of you there, one thumbs up. So I've been talking now for an hour and 2 minutes. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob. Hope you're doing well. I'm hanging in here. Let's make a phone call, see if we can get someone to join us. Really, I mean, it was 91 degrees. I didn't think it would get cold. Hey there. Okay, cancel. Oh. Well, let's see if Anthony answers the phone. No. Whoops. And this guy is one of my godsons. He lived with me in an abandoned building in his formative years. Now he's in England, and he's been married probably 20 something years and has kids. And oh well. Well, nobody wants to come out to play. Okay, let's try something different. Completely different. Let's see, first of all, how much juice do I have left? About half a tank. I'm going to read you some of my stuff. Right? So this is from my legacy. So I have a series of 5 novels: Ear Hair, Legacy, Legend, and then the other 2. And they're anthologies, so they're made up of short stories. So here's one right here for you. Chad, Chad, Chad. Love it is the only thing that is real. The early O's, the new Prometheus, all promise without no reward. But what is the prize? Love, the immutable. All else is illusion. Can you guess my name? Say it, say it, say it. It is. And then I announce who's talking. Love's unheard word, semicolon, the pigtail girl, semicolon, Saint Germain. And this is what they say. Love's freedom, Big Bang, comes with a cost, which is your we's consciously intellect must wake up to love's unheard voice. Intellect is more than a diploma. Intellect is the Greek root for knowing by experience. When O.O., that's me, was a boy in Harlem, New York City, in the early 50s, O.O. learned by keeping quiet and listening because I'm not, crush my larynx. As discrimination to be processed with handouts, but rather seen as opportunities to make oneself better. Meaning, when I lived in Harlem, the discrimination that was there was almost negligible. Meaning, at least it was down low. meaning, you know, Harlem is run by grandmas. You know, on Second Avenue side, East Side, all the grandmas were like every kind of European you could imagine, and then in the center it was Black Americans, and in the West Side it was Caribbean Hispanic, Puerto Rican, and that's Puerto Rican is Caribbean Spanish, right? And the grandmas, they all ruled. I don't know how they communicate. You did something naughty on one side, east, west, center. You get home, your grandma would know about it, and you'd hear about it, right? So they kept, there was no police in Harlem in the 50s and early 60s, and I basically um, ran with, I was really, I was Peanut. That's what I was. That was my nickname, Peanut. 'Cause I was a teeny weeny guy, and my dad was always dressed in nice. I was always dressed in nice. And my dad once a year took me to Brooks Brothers and bought me two suits, a sports jacket, and some shirts and pants and socks and shoes and a camel's hair coat. And for the first 5 years, I never grew, but I had a lot of all those things because he kept buying that. And, a tailor would make it for me. Anyway, so I tailored clothes when I was a little kid. So I was hanging out with all these kids who run around in, you know, thrift store clothes, and I was that. So anyway, let's see. So that was, the thing about, and so there was, everyone was poor, but we were richer than the rich people. Knowing by experience. When O.O. was a boy in Harlem, New York City, in the early 50s and O's, learned by keeping quiet and listening actively to O.O.'s elders, whose challenges were not limitations to be complained as discrimination to be processed by handouts, but rather seen as opportunity to make oneself better with difference, where our differences were celebrated rather than intimidated into being Velveeta melting pot. New York City, my neighborhood, O.O.'s neighborhood, like most places then and now, is a composition, a salad bowl of culture. And that's what it was, a salad bowl of culture. Chinatown, Little Italy, Harlem, Spanish Harlem, Fifth Avenue to Second Avenue, East and West, Upper and Lower Sides, countless others, were all religions, socially and culturally separate, and diverse communities lived on top of each other, where English wasn't the primary language. I mean, when I walked down Second Avenue from 34th Street up to 125th Street, because that's what my grandma, she every day took me for 100 blocks walk. We do our chores or whatever we were going to do in the morning, and then by 10 we would walk down Second Avenue. And it was amazing because the smells and tastes, and all those restaurants were getting ready for lunch and dinner at 10 in the morning. But a good portion of them, because they were working class, had breakfast, right? And the breakfast was from like 6 until 10, but they made it for people on the go. You didn't sit at a booth, or they did have like, a thing with seats, a, what do they call that? Big long thing with a bunch of seats on it, like a soda fountain. Is a term for that. But anyway, I basically we would go into them, and my grandma knew everybody, and she had done favors for all of them because she had been a midwife, herbalist, lawyer, doctor, Indian chief when she was younger, right before she started having kids and have families, and Her husband had a modium of success at what he did. He was a barber surgeon from Rome, which he had an amazing thing going on. But J.P. Morgan went and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. Come to America, be an American citizen. I will give you the men's barber at the Waldorf Astoria. All you have to do is, cut my hair first. Right? And then, people don't realize that Hollywood was in New York first because that's where vaudeville and Broadway was. All the actors were there. And Long Island was where they were making airplanes, and so they had big hangars. So they didn't use them all the time, and so the movie guys like Mr. Griffith and what's his name, Charlie Chaplin, and a few other producers would go there and make their movies, right? And because they're making airplanes, and the airplanes are made out of wood, they had lots of carpenters, right? And they had lots of electricians, and they had lots of everything you needed to make movies. So that's where the first movies were. So my grandpa was the guy who got into making makeup for for the movie guys and making them look good. Cut their hair good, all the rest. And he also, because he was doing men's hair, he had a mezzanine above his men's barbershop. And in the 20s, when the women wanted men's haircuts, instead of him, oh, blah, 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 no way, terrible girls. Said, sure, I'll see that mezzanine? I'm going to start doing it up there. So he did. And that's how he got into beauty. And that's how my dad made his fortune. Right? And my mom basically watched my grandpa do everything he did. And she turned it into products that could be mass produced. So that's the American dream, right? So, but I was, because I was like, 2'6", they didn't notice me. Whatever that was. Let's see. Where English wasn't the primary language spoken in each neighborhood, education was not only learned from our elders, the correctional institutions of public school was primary experience, exuberance? The exuberance of the body politic of class operation, opening the doorway of propaganda's opportunity to lie to all our relations. OO's teachers were the measure of the good house slave, plantation self-service, an exemplar slave owner employment. That was New York City. I mean, New York City, the rich people had all these factories, all this manufacturing. Garment District probably, is one of the last left. But where the Navy Yard was, they had steel mills and every kind of, heavy industry over there. Up near Queens, there was this place that was like a little Venice. They had all these little waterways, and they had all these chemical refineries. Everything from making paints and different kinds of chemicals from plants, not oil yet, and sugar and tobacco and you name it, they were distilling it, alcohol. And so that was New York. It was the manufacturing capital. So all the rich people, that's why healthcare in America is based on your employment, because in those days, those guys, they were not against people coming off on the boat. Whoever was the last off the boat was the law of the realm, right? When the Irish came over, there would be signs saying no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. Right? When the Italians, no dogs, no blacks, no Italians. Then when the Germans were really, people don't realize this, but in especially New York, Germans had a hard time. And so, but every group that came over, the last off the boat, were the lowest on the ladder. And the black man was always on the third rung, right? And if the black man bettered himself, they went up the rung or two, they weren't quite as black. I mean, and so you had black doctors, black lawyers, black artisans, black businessmen, and they made money. And but it was very interesting because of Jim Crow, even up in New York. Um, but it was more class. It was very obvious class, and that's why Harlem everyone was driving because they saw the black people kept going up the rung, making money, getting a better apartment, a better house, and that's why the blacks went up to the Bronx because they were up in the South Bronx, because that was above Harlem, and the Bronx are where the super rich people live. And you have Manhattan, and you have Queens and Brooklyn and Staten Island, and those were all named after places in Europe and you know landmarks there, right? But the Bronx was named after a rich family that owned the Bronx. So I'm going up to the Bronx, right? So you're going to go see the Bronx people, right? And so they had big farms up there, and they basically that's where all the food came from. They had their big estates, and then as they made more money by investing in the stock market, because they were the chefs, they only old. That was the Biltmore, all those the new welfare that like J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and they basically the old wealth because they had a relationship with the workers. And this guy, oh, I wish I could remember his name, but he destroyed GE. And one of the reasons we had the savings and loan debacle was because of him, because when he gave a lot of money to Bill Clinton and said, decontrol banks and get rid of Glass-Steagall. And GE had a banking services. They didn't quite have banks, but they had banking services. And so they were the guys, Glass-Steagall kept your bank that you kept your money in, that you had your mortgage with, separate from the investment bank. And when basically Bill Clinton got rid of Glass-Steagall and decontrolled that, because where her house is used to be a working man's. I mean, her house she bought, I think, for $35,000 in 1980. Or my dad bought it, and it's got 3 bedrooms and a basement, and it's kind of a kind of block house. And but over the years, I mean, it became where all the rich people, because it's right on the water, and they have a ferry that goes from um, the town. She's not in that town, but the town that her little town is in is called Red Bank. They have a ferry from Red Bank to Wall Street, and you can take that ferry and go from Red Bank to Wall Street in 30 minutes. Whereas if you take the train, it takes 2 hours. You drive, God knows how long it takes. But because the water, Red Bank is right in the kind of along the Jersey Shore, right where the Hudson goes in there, right? So anyway, so, every time I ask her about her family, they have not a single bit of social conscience. But they all know they're right, right? And especially, I've been an herbalist. I taught at the Swedish Institute, and one of her daughters, has she became a vegan, and she has a kind of vegan restaurant, a couple of them. But it's basically fast food, right? And she got herself a little, herbal store. And, the last time I was there in 2011, she knew nothing. She had no teachers. Was not part of any, she gets everything off the internet. So it's, so my sisters are, again, they, all of my brothers and sisters are English wasn't the primary language spoken in each neighborhood, education was not only learned from the elders, the correctional institution of public school was the primary exuberance of the body politic of class operation, opening the doorway to propaganda's opportunity to lie to all our relations. Their teachers were the measure of the good house slave, plantation self-service, and exemplar slave owner employment through the pedagogy of MK Ultra of the individual slave mind, through self-centered improvement of the slave owner corporate bottom line of all our relations, self-mutilating enslavement to unstable mass consumption, materialistic. I write this stuff, but I can't pronounce it. And I'm a wordsmith, so I write this stuff. It's like sculpture. It's supposed to be read, almost not spoken. There is something out of body when you are no longer you, and you are more than the we. When your we is more than all our relations, free-willed, ass-ending soul. So, Kadra, do you want to hear a dreamy dreamland story? Say it, say it, say it. Tell us like it is. Right. That's what I try and do all the time. And that's from Tracy Chapman. Zombieland, America, home of the indentured, land of the enslaved, as it is. Scene 1. It was a Good Friday, 2 days before Easter. Mrs. Ernest Matthews and Mrs. Charity Green were second-generation Methodist school slaves to be teachers and nurses. Their parents, Manhattan Holocaust survivors, were bred. So the Manhattan Holocaust was when the Irish Civil War draft rebellion occurred. Because when the Irish, famine was, the Irish people come over on the boats, and the guys would come off the boats, and they would put a Union uniform and a gun and sent straight into the meat grinder. And that's why the Union was able to, because the Southern Army of Lee was so much better than the Northern Army. So, if they just had the morons that were in the North go up against the Southerners, the Civil War would have been over in 2 years. But because they just kept throwing 6 million Irish into the meat grinder. And so they're pretty stupid because they gave them uniforms, gave them a gun, and then sent them over to the train station. Well, at a certain point, those guys, they get off the boat, get the uniform, get the gun, and as they were, being walked over to the railroad station, a lot of them would just kind of ease into, hide in plain sight of all the other Irish in the 5 corners. Go watch the movie Gangs of New York. It describes it extraordinarily well. That movie is one movie every American should see because it really tells everything the way it fucking is. So, that's kind of what was going on, and in the Civil War. And so the Irish said, "Fuck this," and they had a gun, so they said, "No, you can't draft me. I'm not going." And so they sent in militias, which were better trained Irish soldiers. And then when they went up against, "Hey, cousin John, how you doing?" So those guys went over to the other side, and they kept losing militias as they were trying to put down this draft rebellion. And then more and more and more and more Irish guys just said no, and then they stopped working for the rich. Right, the smart rich got out of town, but the other ones, because it wasn't really a rebellion, I think They just said no. And then at a certain point, because they started having guns, different gangs. So the Irish started having fights with guns. And so it started to get a little, but they weren't going after they weren't going after the government or the rich people or any of the above. Some of the guys would go uptown and break into their houses and steal their silverware and shit. But it wasn't like, rebellion. It wasn't like what happened on January 6th in the Capitol. It wasn't like that. And so, but the military couldn't keep, they didn't have a never ending line of guys to throw in the meat grinder now, right? So now the boats coming from Ireland didn't go to New York anymore. They went, like to Philly and places for, Delaware. So, but it already gotten out. And so they're having a hard time. So what the North did was they took their Navy with the big guns, surrounded Manhattan, and pulverized, just like the Russians are pulverizing the Danube. They shelled New York City. And they shelled it for 2 days and killed everyone. Not just the Irish, but the black, the rich people, you name it. Whoever was on Manhattan died. 250,000 people in 2 days. The first industrial military Holocaust, right? So go look that one up. And again, like I said, the movie Gangs in New York has got that really nice, right? Their parents, Methodist Holocaust survivors were bred as trades and crass animals. Good niggers, like their parents, to fill the service needs of the reptilian benefactors of the imperial ego illusion, banking, military, media, mind control, education, religious complex. That's what Eisenhower, but he couldn't get it all in his mouth, so he just called it the military industrial complex. A pre flood, hidden hand, transnational high table, what I call the hidden hand. And other people call it unipolar hegemony. Their families were good slave people, community loving families, living the American dreamscape nightmare of working hard by the golden rule, but without any gold, they couldn't rule. Within the meat puppet reality, they were still slave niggers. No matter what color their skin, tell it like it is. Mrs. Faith Yazoo, whose husband was Timothy, the son of the slain human rights activist preacher who was lynched on a DC lamppost of Progress on Pearl Street, New York City, in front of Mr. Thomas Alva Edison's first power station. And I lived in that power station up in the attic, which was unbelievable. So this was an industrial building. It was on Pearl Street. Pearl Street ran from the Battery all the way up to Wall Street, about 8 blocks, right? And that's, that was way lower Manhattan, right? And that was called the Battery because the Dutch put, a military battery right at the tip of Manhattan. So when boats would come in, they could blow them out of the water. It's called the Battery. Why it's called the Battery, right? So Edison put his, because Mr. Morgan wanted to light up his bank building and wanted to light up the New York Stock Exchange and wanted a number of things. And Bell was down there. And so that was all the new age economy occurring, right? The market for the mercantile market of, things like gold and silver and copper and coal and whatever. It's a term for that. Anyway, that's why the power station was there. And Edison wanted to demonstrate his new electric light bulbs, right? So he built that building. It's a big concrete brick building, right? First floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor, attic. And the attic was this big, tall, it's like a church, big steeple, big, because they had a big steam engine down in the basement, right? And they couldn't, didn't have big enough generators. They had that one big generator. So on all these floors, and these floors were poured concrete on steel, right? And so they had generators on all these floors, and they had these big belts coming from the main shaft of the steam engine that would run up through this, shaft to where these generators were, and the generators would make current for different parts of that neighborhood. Because Edison couldn't transmit electricity further than 6 miles before he had a massive voltage drop. But anything over 200 yards, you start to have a voltage drop. 6 miles, and it was gone. So he had this one building with 20 big generators running off of one big steam engine down in the basement, and that was his Edison plant, right? And he had streetlights instead of gas streetlights. He had, and gas in those days, gas was king. Gas was it lit everyone's house. It heated everyone's house. It cooked everyone's food. It boiled the water. Gas was the miracle thing. When electricity came along, the gas people were not happy because lighting was also gas. Streets were lit with gas. The theaters were lit with gas. Homes were lit with gas. Yes, the gas light blew out for some reason. Everyone would suffocate or burn to death in the house, and that's why they got mantle lights, because it took way less gas, and the mantle would burn. And if the gas, for some reason, you couldn't blow out a mantle light. You could turn it way down, but you couldn't blow it out. So, and that's that's technology. You have a need, so that's problem, action, solution, and that's where we got ourselves today. We're living in this thing of problem, action, solution. So we need to reorganize the populace, have a war, have a pet, the unexpected consequence. Right? Here I am, back. It's not so dark anymore. So what you hear isn't so much the rain. It's more the what you call it, the rain coming out of the trees. Well, there's nobody listening. It's 1 hour, 47 minutes, and 53 seconds. How much time do I have left in the battery? It's down to 48%. Okay. So, I don't know what else to tell you. I hope you enjoyed my little running on sentences. Let's see if I can get anyone on the phone again. Doop, 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 doop. Doop, 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 doop. Do, 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 do. There we go. Oh, well. Do, 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 do. Let us see. It's 4:49, almost 5 o'clock. There we are, nice and live. Well, let's see. Looking at all the shows. This is important. 53 people watched. Who is in control? 15 people watch. I'm back. 14 people watch. Wake up. 23 people watch. I guess that's all the people who are awake in the world. Where is this ship going? 23 people watched. Doorway. 19 people watched. Just say no. 21 people said. Is there a is this regular? 24. Let's see. New beginning. 17. And where we are now. Well, I hope you're all happy. I love you all. I'll catch you soon. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this is what we got to look forward to.
In the year 1070,
The race started to run.
named Anselm of
This is going to be your new policeman. So, guys, you ready for that? That technology exists today. That's going to be on the street in a few years. Ready for that? Try and talk to that. Those. Sure, we're going to defund the police and we're going to bring these guys online. Oh man, it is happening now, gang. You don't have to wait till later. And what's sad is that the folk like my oldest sister and all her kids, her 8 kids who all had 8 kids, so she's got like 100 and something loved ones right there. They're going to be the first baloney sliced up. It's really, I don't know even how to explain how sad it is. So all I can say is The only thing that is real is love's co-creation. The other day, I was in a real, as Hillary Clinton say, a diner of deplorables, and there were these folks in there who were definitely churchy people. They were all talking about their church and how they hated this deacon and that minister and blah 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 blah. Right? And I'm listening to it because I got this ear that listens. And listened for about 5 minutes, and I was doing my thing. I gave my order, my breakfast came. I had a good bit of it, and then and these guys are super overweight. They, and I can say that because I used to weigh 460 pounds. So anyway, I basically went to them and to ask them, "What's the most important thing?" And they said, "Well, it's to be saved." I said, "What does that mean?" "Well, you got to be baptized." I said, "What does that mean?" And I just I could not explain what his logos meant. Right? And then I said, I talked about, the only real truth is God's unconditional love. It's in our heart. If it's not in our heart, then it's not doing good. Right? So anyway, we like that, and there was one guy who was an ordained minister, and he was kind of retired from another church. And these other guys were deacons from another church, and the girls over there were their wives, and they were all talking smack about all the people in the church. "Did you see what Dondra had on? And she's she's going to hell, So it was like quite interesting to just, and I just talked, straight up about what love was. And now the minister, he goes, "Are you an ordained minister?" I said, "Well, I went to school to be a Catholic priest, and then I went to school to be a Jewish rabbi. And then I spent a number of years in Mideast with the Islam folk, and then in Japan with the Shinto, and then kind of in India with the. And so I've studied every religion." So he was like, because he was like the most respected leader of the pack, and he was like shaking my hand, saying, "Boy, you should come to their church. Let's. Where do you hang out? I want to talk more about this stuff with you." So it was interesting. So that's we are right in the middle of it. We're not waiting for it. It's not going to happen. It's not almost here. It is here, right? And I keep saying, the next strangest of strange things, aliens landing, by 4th of July. Something strange is going to happen around the 4th of July, and that's just around the corner. But it'll be like not that strange, because what'll happen? Something will happen. And oil prices will go lower. Gas will be $1.50 or $1.76, because that's about around here. Gas was $1.76 before Biden. A little after Biden got his job. Before, a little after 1.6. So, anyway, that's all I can say. Hope you're good. Catch you later. Die about this. No, I have to do this. Well, maybe I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe not. Who knows?